So good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening for this very special event to hear one of the world's experts in the health applications of Transcendental Meditation, Dr. Norman Rosenthal. I'm Dr. Stuart Rothenberg. I'm National Medical Director for the Transcendental Meditation Health Professionals Association. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I wanted to mention at the beginning that those of you who are viewing are doing so through two different web platforms. For the health professionals, most likely, you're on the Adobe Connect platform, which is interactive and will allow you to ask questions. And we certainly want to encourage that, but perhaps more towards the end of Dr. Rosenthal's talk, we'll open up for a question and answer session. Those of you who are not health professionals, the invitation you received invited you to link in through a video streaming on the tm.org website, and that will allow you to view the entire webinar, but not to interact or ask questions. So I want to start by introducing our speaker for the evening, Dr. Norman Rosenthal. Dr. Rosenthal is clinical professor of psychiatry at the Georgetown University Medical School. He was formerly senior researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health, and it was there that he achieved renown by leading the team that first identified seasonal affective disorder, SAD, and described or pioneered the use of light therapy to treat it. Dr. Rosenthal has been in the private practice of psychiatry in the Washington, D.C. area for over 30 years, where he treats a wide variety of psychiatric problems using many different forms of therapy. He was awarded the prestigious Anna Monica Foundation Research Prize for his contribution to research in treating depression. He has been listed as one of the best doctors in America, as well as one of this country's top psychiatrists. Dr. Rosenthal and his work have been widely covered in the popular media, and he has appeared on the Today Show, Good Morning America, National Public Radio, and many other forums. He is the author or co-author of over 200 professional articles and 5 popular books. This webinar coincides with the release in paperback of 2 of Dr. Rosenthal's most important books, the New York Times and Washington Post bestseller Transcendence, Healing and Transformation Through Transcendental Meditation. And in the new paperback version, which has just been released, it is expanded and contains a brand new chapter on the latest developments with Transcendental Meditation, as well as the 4th edition of his book Winter Blues, Everything You Need to Know to Beat SAD, which the New York Times has called a landmark book. So it's a very great pleasure and privilege to present Dr. Norman Rosenthal.
Thank you, Dr. Rothenberg, for that kind introduction. And welcome to all of you who are listening. The days are now getting shorter and darker, and it is a wonderful time to find out about meditation, specifically Transcendental Meditation. I'm reminded of the words of the great author Victor Hugo, who said, "Meditate, all is light, even the night." So here we are in the evening, talking about meditation, and hopefully you will find the talk illuminating. If I may have the first slide, please. As I thought of how to organize the whole area of Transcendental Meditation for my book Transcendence, I thought of breaking them down into these 4 topic areas. And I should say that many of you out there have probably been meditating for very much longer than I have. I'm a relative newcomer to this field at about 5 years of meditation. And 5 years ago, if somebody had said to me, you know, there is this state called transcendence, and it's a different state from sleeping and waking and dreaming. It's the 4th state of consciousness. I would have thought to myself, now, that's a little far-fetched. But indeed, now that I am meditating and do so rather regularly, surprisingly regularly actually, I am aware of this very unusual state of mind. It is one which is both calm and alert at the same time. You know, normally when we're calm, we're kind of sleepy, or when we're alert, we're awake and aroused, but this kind of combines these two areas. The other element of transcendence is that your boundaries kind of disappear. You don't know where you are exactly or when exactly it is in time. Of course, if somebody were to grab you and ask you, you'd be able to answer. But as you enter the state of transcendence, as you slip into this, I should say, very pleasant state, it doesn't really matter to you where you are, when you are, because you have visited a place within yourself, a place that's in each and every one of us, that is so pleasant and so interesting. And this is what I discovered myself. And of course, when I say I discovered it, I'm saying it like when you say, oh, I discovered this great new restaurant. You didn't actually discover the restaurant. But because it's the first time you were there and it's so exciting and it's so novel, you feel almost as though you've discovered it for the first time. And that's the discovery that I am so enjoying sharing with other people. And of course, many of you discovered this so very long ago. And so it is not new, but it is always new, because every time you meditate, every time you go into the state, it's a feeling of, wow, here it is again. It's like always fresh, always new. Now, you may well ask, since I'm a psychiatrist and I'm interested in the brain, and probably a lot of you are interested in the brain, what is happening in the brain when you're feeling this state of transcendence? And fortunately, we do actually know a lot about that. But before I go on to that, let me show you what's on this next slide. And that is that there are different categories of meditation. There is a tendency for people to imagine that all meditation is the same. And it really isn't. Now, I'm not saying anything is better than anything else, because frankly, things haven't been tested head to head. But I am saying that they're not identical. Every kind of meditation asks you to do something different with your brain. If you look over to the far right of the slide, you'll see the kind of meditation that TM fits into. A meditation where you use a mantra or word sound that is specifically given to you by a teacher, and you're taught how to use it. And that is what enables you to slip into the state of transcendence. And it's not just the mantra that's important, but it's how to actually use it. That is like a trick or a knack. It's something that you learn by practice, under guidance, just like you might learn to swim or to ride a bicycle or to do the martial art or to play the piano. It's one of those skills that many people can acquire, but it just takes practice and guidance to do so. If you look over to the left of the slide, you'll see two other forms of meditation, including focused attention, like focusing on an image, or open monitoring, like following the breath. These are all completely different, and I'll show you shortly how the brain reacts differently to these different tasks that it is given in these different forms of meditation. Next slide, please. What is involved in TM is firstly a one-on-one meeting with a teacher. Then there are 7 steps which involve lectures, a personal interview, and 4 teaching sessions. And these teaching sessions are the core of the teaching, because that's where you kind of practice the mantra, you get the guidance, you get the feedback, and you're sort of good to go. There is some follow-up, etc. But in 1 week, it is a technique that most anybody can learn. Next slide. Here you see my colleague, Dr. Fred Travis, putting on this set of electrodes on this model's head. And each electrode is at a certain point on the scalp. And from each electrode, you're going to get a reading as to what is happening electrically in the brain just underneath that electrode. So you get a sort of 3-dimensional view of the brain, and you also get a sense of what kind of electrical activity is going on. Next slide. And you see in the 3 different kinds of meditation that I mentioned earlier, if you look to the right, you can see you don't have to be an electrophysiologist to tell that those are 3 different kinds of patterns that you're getting. And that's just another validation that these are different forms of meditation. They're going to result in different brainwave patterns. Thanks. Here are 2 brainwave patterns. The one on the left is a slow rhythm called an alpha rhythm. The one on the right is a quicker rhythm called a beta rhythm. The alpha rhythms are associated with calmness. They're associated with reflection and delving internally. And that's what bathes the front of the brain, particularly during the transcendent state. That's what is found when you transcend not only a sweep of alpha rhythms, but also something called coherence, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about shortly. Next slide, please. What you see if you look at these 2 graphs is that on the left, and there again, you don't have to be a mathematician or an electrophysiologist to see that all those horizontal lines line up underneath one another. And each horizontal line is one of those electrodes that you saw being placed on that lady's head by Fred Travis. So each one creates this tracing or lead. And then if you look on the right, on the other hand, you will see that these are not aligned with one another. The ones on the left are said to be coherent. The ones on the right are said to lack coherence. And what has been found is that when you meditate, especially specifically when you do TM, brainwaves in different regions of the brain become more coherent. And various studies show that greater levels of coherence are associated with being more competent, whether you're looking at athletes or whether you're looking at business folks. You are going to be higher on various pecking orders or various hierarchies if your brain waves are more coherent overall. So you're already beginning to see that it's a good thing to get greater coherence, and that is something that TM enables you to do. Here's another way of looking at coherence. All the lines that join the dots on the right-hand side views of the brain indicate areas of the brain that are coherent with one another. And that's what happens when you enter into the transcendent state versus the 2 pictures on the left where there's very little coherence. Thanks. Now, this is a profile of the brain, and the 2 golden areas refer to 2 very intriguing areas. The one that's right in the front, it's just behind the forehead, is the prefrontal cortex. Now, that has been called the CEO of the brain because it's the part of the brain that helps you make higher level judgments and so-called executive decisions. If that area is compromised, if somebody is injured in that area, they will stop being able to make good business judgments, good personal judgments, and they will start acting erratically and poorly, and that indicates the importance of this area in decision making. That little golden ball that you see right down at the base of the brain, that is the amygdala, or the brain's alarm system. If you're walking along a path and a snake comes your way, you're going to jump back even before you're really aware that the snake is there. That's the amygdala saving you. That's the amygdala having evolved over millions of years so that those people who jumped away from the snake, those were the ones that passed on their genes. So that's why it's such a quick-moving alarm system. Now, normally, in the course of our everyday lives, we're having alarm systems going on or alarm bells going on a lot of the time when something is threatening us. And that's when the amygdala sends signals up to the prefrontal cortex and says, watch out, be careful, this colleague can't be trusted, that person over there is a, quote, snake in the grass. Interesting use of language, considering the snake we just discussed. And so you're getting feedback from your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex. And then the prefrontal cortex is saying, that's not really such a bad thing, don't worry about that. Yes, I'm going to take action on that. So the prefrontal cortex, when it's functioning well, is making these executive decisions based on feedback it's getting from other brain centers. Now, when somebody is excessively anxious or when you're excessively stressed, what happens? What happens is that the amygdala is making noises all day long, and the poor prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed by these noises and doesn't even know which ones are real alarms and which ones are false alarms. If we shift over to the metaphor of a business, if the prefrontal cortex is the CEO, then the amygdala is like the fire marshal. Now, when there's a fire in the building, that fire marshal needs to come and bang on the door and get everybody out, including the CEO. But for the rest of the time, he needs to stay in the basement. What happens when you're overstressed or when you have an anxiety disorder is that fire marshal's banging on your door day and night. And needless to say, the executive, the CEO, is not able to get any work done because he's being overwhelmed or she's being overwhelmed. Now we're getting a lot of female CEOs, which is a very welcome development, and cannot decide which of these alarm bells needs to have an immediate response and which is a false alarm. Next slide. So here you see in the brain during meditation increased alpha waves in general, but particularly in that important prefrontal cortex where the executive decisions are being made, an increase in coherence in alpha and beta waves. And what is found when people meditate, and this happens when you continue to meditate more and more, is that people become less stressed and better able to make decisions. And I should mention that that transcendence that I spoke about in the beginning, you know, the transcendent state that you go into when you meditate, well, you might say to me, well, what's the good of that? I mean, 20 minutes twice a day. What about the rest of the day? Well, the good news is that that transcendence flows over into the rest of the day. It's a state that has been called cosmic consciousness. And it infuses the rest of the day with a kind of calm, pleasant frame of mind. Now, sometimes when I've said calm and pleasant and not reacting to minor stresses, people say to me, well, you know, I don't want to be calm and pleasant and all chilled out so that I never get anything done and I'm not creative and I'm not energetic. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. What happens when people begin to meditate is they are less reactive to unnecessary stresses, but at the same time they're often more creative. Somehow their creative centers, including the prefrontal cortex, are freed up. No longer are they tied down by the everyday hassles that can overwhelm us. They're left free to think, to create. We're going to talk more about that. So just as in the actual transcendent state, you have alert attentiveness and calmness coexisting, so in the interim state, the state of waking, does the transcendence overflow and leave us feeling both less anxious and less reactive and more energized and more creative. Next slide. So, I call my book Transcendence, Healing and Transformation through Transcendental Meditation. By healing, I mean actual physical healing. So you might say, how is that possible? Just from sitting down twice a day and meditating. Give me a break. Well, here's the data. Here are two arteries, or at least it's a cartoon of two arteries. And if I was sitting in a hall and I said, would you prefer that your artery looked like one on the left or one on the right? Everybody would put up their hands that they would rather have the artery on the left. Why? Because it's open, it's clear, the blood is running through, and if whatever's on the other side of that artery, if it's the heart or if it's the brain, it's in good shape. It's getting blood, it's getting oxygen, it's feeling terrific. The artery on the right, on the other hand, is affected by a very common cardiovascular illness called atherosclerosis. Foamy cells containing cholesterol are infiltrating the lining of this artery and narrowing its lumen, constricting it, preventing blood from flowing properly through it. So if there's a brain or a heart at the other end of this artery, that organ is in trouble. It is liable to have a heart attack or a stroke, which is what happens when blood is cut off to one of these two organs. Next slide, please. Now, how bad is this nationwide? Well, cardiovascular disease, which is what I just showed you, is the #1 killer and cause of disability in the world. In the United States, more than 1 in 3 people have been diagnosed with it, and it will kill 1 in 3 of us. 1 in 3 of us will die either of a heart attack or a stroke. So we're not talking about some small, trivial medical problem. This is serious stuff. It's a multi-billion-dollar cost to everybody if you count the medical expenses, the disability, the time off work, etc. Next slide. Now, let's start with blood pressure, because in a way, the arterial system is like your plumbing system. And if there's too much pressure in the plumbing system, what's going to happen? The pipes are going to wear down or they're going to burst. The arteries, in a way, are no different. That's what's going to happen to them. So that has been very well studied with Transcendental Meditation. This is a meta-analysis of over 700 people, and with a varying blood pressure, high, low, or normal, and let's see what the results show. These are all published in excellent places, peer-reviewed article, not the Journal of Irreproducible Results, but journals like Stroke and cardiac journals and very well-reviewed journals. Okay, here you see the American Journal of Hypertension, and what you see is how much lower the systolic and diastolic blood pressures are if you meditate. And what you're seeing here is that when these blood pressures are being taken, like in the middle of the afternoon or whenever, you haven't just meditated. This shows how the effects of meditation carry over through the day. Next slide. And here's a meta-analysis done at the time of many different kinds of stress management techniques. I say it with quotes around it because not all stress management techniques are equal. On the left, you see the greatest reduction occurring with Transcendental Meditation, and then you see variable results going all the way to the technique on the right that actually makes the blood pressure worse, which I love that particular part of the graph, because what it shows you is that you can call something a stress management technique, but that doesn't make it an effective technique. You can only know whether it really is effective by looking at the data which we have over here. Now, you might ask, is this consequential? You're showing me 5 points decrease, 3 points decrease. Does it really make a difference? Well, cardiologists will tell you that these degrees of reduction of blood pressure really do make a difference. But actually, we can do even better than that because there are data that look at that question. Next slide, please. This is data from the carotid artery. That is the artery in the neck that carries blood to the brain. And what they're looking at is the thickening of the interior lining, which you saw. You saw those foamy cells in the interior lining. That's what they're looking at here. And with Transcendental Meditation, that's the blue curve, that actually decreases. The thickening regresses. In its early stages, this atherosclerosis is a reversible condition. So you're actually getting more blood flow through that artery after less than a year of TM. Whereas on the right, which is a control treatment, the thickening is increasing, which is the natural course of the disease. Next slide, please. Here we have another parameter of cardiac disease, the left ventricular enlargement. It's not a good thing. Imagine if you have higher blood pressure, your heart has to work harder and harder to push the blood through your body. So what happens? The heart muscle gets bigger and bigger. And that's a bad sign. It predicts a bad outcome in people with cardiac disease. What you see here is that the blue area, you can't regress that. You can't reverse that. But at least the advance of that particular parameter is limited, and compared to the controls, which continue to show this increasing heart size, greatly limited. Next slide. And this is another parameter that doctors, of course, in the audience will be familiar with, insulin resistance. Bad thing, belly fat, obesity, resists the insulin, sugar piles up in the bloodstream, and diabetes is the consequence. We know we have an epidemic. We have an epidemic of obesity. We have an epidemic of insulin resistance, and this is causing an epidemic of diabetes, and that in turn again predisposes to cardiovascular disease. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, you might say yes, but does it really make a difference? When push comes to shove, is it going to make me live longer? Well, that's what my colleague Robert Schneider, who is the lead author on all these cardiovascular studies, or many of them, that's what he and his colleagues were asking. They were saying, hey, I wonder if it really makes a difference. And what happened to all those folks that we studied in our hypertension studies, in these controlled studies? And they didn't have NIH funding to follow these people up. They were limited duration studies, 9 months, 10 months, something like that, or even less. And they thought, well, we don't even know if they're still meditating after all these years, because by the time they asked that question, it was almost 10 years later. And then somebody got the idea, why don't we check the death records? That way we can look at the death records of those in the TM condition and those in the control condition and see if it made any difference. And remember, they were randomized to these two conditions. And sure enough, there was a 23% lower mortality rate from all causes when you looked at the ones who had been years before in the TM condition, and an even greater 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease. Because, there's certain kinds of diseases that you wouldn't expect TM to help. Like if there's a bad storm and a tree falls and it crushes your car and you're inside, well, having learned TM is not going to help you in that circumstance. So those statistics you wouldn't imagine would be affected. So the fact that all-cause mortality is down 23% is pretty amazing. And the fact that cardiovascular mortality is even more decreased is even more amazing. Now, think of it this way. If I said to you, if you do a technique twice a day, every day, the chance that you will die in the next 9 or 10 years will be decreased by 25%. It's kind of a no-brainer. I would even take castor oil twice a day if it enabled me to live that much longer. But luckily, TM is very, very pleasant. It's not anything like castor oil. So if for no other reason, and I'm going to give you lots of other reasons, this is a reason whereby you might consider that along with your diet, along with your exercise, along with your regular medical checkups and all the other good things you do for your health, and I really believe that health is a composite, global package. But I do also believe that this is one really valuable element that I think we in the medical profession may have overlooked, which is why I'm so happy to have the chance to bring this to your attention this evening. Next slide, please. Okay. Robert Schneider and company actually went on to replicate his mortality studies, looking at high-risk people over age 55, people who are vulnerable to stroke or heart attacks, watching them over a period of 5 years. He noted, and his colleagues noted, once again, that the mortality was reduced by almost 50%. So another validation that this was not a fluke, that this is perfectly sensible, reduce stress, reduce reactivity to stress, and you spare your arteries and you spare your cardiovascular system. Now, what do I mean reactivity to stress? What I mean is all day long we're being zapped by stress. And as we're zapped, our fight or flight responses gear into action. We secrete adrenaline, our blood pressure goes up, our heart pumps faster, and then, it goes over and it kind of comes down. And they've actually done studies, and they've shown that if you practice TM regularly, you have a crisp response to stress, but it rapidly comes down to baseline. Whereas if you're not meditating, it's going to come down more slowly, and then there are one or two little false alarm blips that follow even after the stress is over. So what TM is really doing, it's acting as a surge protector on our stress system, on our fight or flight system. It is acting as a buffer, protecting us from having these blood pressure surges that damage the linings of our arteries and limit the duration of our life even more than it already is. Next slide. For those of us who are interested in the costs of medical care, which should be really all of us, these are studies about decreased hospitalization and outpatient visits in those who meditate. Next slide. And this wonderful data set by Heron in Montreal showing their expenses, doctors' expenses for people who do and people who don't choose to meditate. And if you see the right-hand side of the graph, which is the side where it's shaded in a kind of an orange color, that's when people start meditating, you see. And what you see is, if you look at that blue line, you'll see that the meditator's expenses go down and the non-meditator expenses go up. Next slide, please. If you look at an older population, that divergence is even greater. Because as we're getting older, our medical expenses are going higher and higher and higher, and the difference in those who start to meditate is even more profound. So fascinating data that anybody interested in healthcare costs should be pricking up their ears when they hear it. Next slide. Okay, so enough about healing. Let's talk about transformation. And starting with anxiety. Now, when I'm talking about transformation, healing and transformation through transcendental meditation, I'm talking about the psychological changes that come about with meditation. And when I say the word transformation, I don't mean so-and-so was feeling really, really bad, and now he's feeling only moderately bad, so he kind of improved. Because that wouldn't be a transformation. Transformation is he's like a different person. And in my book, I have examples in the anxiety section of one actually very well-known neuropsychologist, very famous neuropsychologist, who was pretty disabled in his undergrad years with anxiety. 2 people in 1 week said, "You're like the most nervous person I've ever seen." Started to meditate, and now we're dealing 30 or 40 years later. He has his doctorate. He is one of the most prestigious neuropsychologists in the country. He attributes a lot of that success to TM. We have an example of a Pulitzer Prize winner with panic anxiety, whose shoulders were hunched up. He was so anxious all the time. Well, even though a great skeptic, TM helps him, and we're now 3 or 4 decades later. So these are enduring effects. If you get a placebo, maybe it lasts a week, maybe it lasts 2 weeks. It doesn't usually last for 30 or 40 years. Not the placebos I've encountered. And so on. And this is a meta-analysis of anxiety done at the time, showing the power of TM compared to a variety of control conditions in reducing anxiety. Next slide, please. What is happening in all these things? Well, the amygdala, the alarm system, is being quieted. Things are silenced. I've seen it in myself. I used to get anxious, and I used to say to myself, here next to me is my good friend and colleague, Dr. Rothenberg. And maybe I would think of him and I would say, you know, I've got to call Dr. Rothenberg. He said something to me today, and I'm worried. What did it mean? What did he mean when he said that? Or he looked at me funny or whatever, and I better call him right now. What would happen? I would call him in an anxious state. He'd get anxious. Why am I anxious? What did he do wrong? The next thing, we'd both be anxious. It would make things worse. Now, I say, well, you know, why do I have to call him tonight? It's not urgent. Let's wait till tomorrow. And then what happens is tomorrow comes, and I think, you know, you don't need to call him. Just maybe a one-line email saying, is everything okay? And then the email comes back, sure, everything's fine. And that's the end of the story. So the amygdala is settled down. The prefrontal cortex is freed up. Anxiety is less. And we've got all of that brain left to do all kinds of enjoyable and productive things instead of worrying, what did so-and-so mean when he looked funny at me earlier today? Next slide, please. Let's talk about a very important type of anxiety disorder, combat-related PTSD. It affects 1 in 7 of our many returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. We know these people have been deployed multiple times. They've been exposed to closed head injuries. They've been shelled. They've been bombed. They've been shot at. And they're pretty jumpy when they come back. Half of those affected had never sought help for their symptoms, and half of those who did seek help were not adequately treated. A recent RAND report. Next slide, please. Even in the 70s, a controlled study was done with TM versus the psychotherapy of the day in 10 veterans and 12 controls. And after 3 months, 7 of the 10 TMers said, you know, I'm feeling better. Thank you for your help. I don't need any more help. Whereas the control showed little improvement. Next slide, please. Now, this is a pilot study that my colleagues and I did on 5 returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And just to give you the profile of one of them, whom I do feature in my book, this was a young man who'd driven a Humvee, a military vehicle, and the commander of the Humvee said, go up that road over there, and he knew it was a really bad road. It was a hotbed for IEDs, but what could he do? He had to listen. You have to obey orders. Drove up the road, and sure enough, the Humvee went over an IED. It exploded. People were injured. He was really angry. He felt really guilty. He'd hurt his fellow soldiers, his comrades, and he came back stateside, and he was just jumpy as all get up. During the night, he couldn't even sleep properly. He would wake up sweating, drenched in sweat. And one time, he even, his girlfriend bumped into him during the night. He caught her in a chokehold because he thought she was the enemy attacking him during the night. And in the day, he would have flashbacks every time his car would go over a pothole. He would feel as though he had gone over some bomb back in Iraq again. And he was drinking a lot in order to try and medicate himself, and it wasn't helping, it was making matters worse. Well, after a couple of months, this guy was unrecognizable. His anxiety got less. He started working hard at school. His relationship flourished. When I last spoke to him, he'd got his degree. He's got a good government job. He's still with the same woman. He's just a totally different guy. And we saw that time and again. You can see that blue line, that's the gold standard measure for post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's 50% reduced in the small group. Now we're seeing studies, controlled studies, larger studies being undertaken across the country. And if I were a betting man, I will put money on them coming out positive, just from what I have seen myself. But of course, that's why you have to do the controlled studies, because anecdotes are wonderful, but they're not sufficient. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to go into the slide in detail. Suffice it to say that alcohol, drug, and tobacco addictions can be helped by TM. 19 controlled studies. And if you are familiar with the 12 steps of AA and the other 12-step programs, you know that the 11th step says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God or with a higher power, depending on what you believe in. And so even in a lay program, they've realized the value of meditation, and here we've got proof in terms of controlled studies. Now, I'm very pleased that the issue of religion came up even tangentially, because I want to really emphasize, excuse me, I'm going to take a glass of water. I want to emphasize that TM is a standalone technique. You don't have to believe in anything. You don't have to buy into any cosmology or explanation of the origins of the universe. You can be of any religion, but the point is, it's not religious. It's a standalone technique, which is why I have been so excited about its potential value to heal and transform people. Next slide, please. Some of the people who've been transformed are in the worst schools in the nation, which doesn't mean that it's only the worst students that can be helped. A lot of students could be helped. But this is a picture of the Visitation Valley School, where my friend and colleague Jim Durkee was a principal. It's a middle school. He was a principal for many years. They called him the night before they were going to open the school. The superintendent said, "Jim, we don't have a suitable principal for the school, so we've appointed you." And he said, well, when he got there, it was bedlam. One scene was of a very large middle school child, 200 pounds, banging a garbage can against the wall of the corridor. It was just chaos. And at that time, the David Lynch Foundation was offering schools in the Bay Areas the opportunity to bring in the so-called quiet time program, which is a form of TM in the schools. And Jim Durkee thought, what have I got to lose? Next slide, please. What you see here is the attendance levels before and after in the Visitation Valley School, which is one of the worst schools in the areas, or used to be. As you see, the red bars on the left, the attendance going down, down, down each year. And after the quiet time program is introduced, up, up, up. Well, a second school, Everett, said, I want the program too. And the same trend of change in attendance can be seen in a second school as well. Next slide, please. You may well ask, what happened to GPA? Same deal. Lowering before the TM quiet time program, improvement after the TM quiet time program. And of greatest interest, the holy grail of education is to close the gap between the lowest and the highest functioning students. The gap began to close. It was amazing. The whole tone of the school changed. People who went to visit the school said you couldn't believe it was the same school. Peaceful, quiet. The kids were happier. For this transformation, and it is a transformation, it's not just a minor improvement, Jim Durkee was awarded the Middle School Principal Award of the Year for the entire United States, about 2,000 schools. A miraculous accomplishment and an incredible honor, very well deserved. Next slide. A small study of ADHD, I won't go into. It's a pilot study. It's a very interesting idea because here's another situation where the small controlled study conducted by Drs. Grosswald and Stixrud got the schools so excited they could really see changes in their students. And it's another promising area that has yet to be fully explored. Next, please. Let's talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anyone out there who did Psychology 101 remembers this pyramid. On the bottom, you have the most basic needs, physiological needs, safety needs, belonging and love, esteem, and at the top of the pyramid is the need to be the best you can be. If you're a writer, you're going to have to be able to write. If you're a singer, you're going to be able to sing. Whatever it is that's inside us that we feel is our special gift or our special talent, there's this incredible need in us to actualize that, to make that happen. And next slide, please. Many studies of TM, and the details I won't go into, 42 studies, a meta-analysis, showed on a scale of self-actualization, great improvements following TM. And it's not surprising. Remember, decreased stress, quiet amygdala, fire marshals not banging on every door in the building, CEO can sit in peace and quiet, people can work in peace and quiet and focus and concentrate. That's what you need. You need quiet and untroubled space in order to create and be your best. And that's what TM affords people. That's what it's afforded me. The book Transcendence was the easiest book that I've ever written because I had the gift of transcendence myself, a gift that was given to me that enabled me to endure the solitude of the writer, the focus and concentration that is needed to produce a piece of work. Next slide. In prisons, there's decreased recidivism, amazing stories of brutal prisoners turned around by TM and actually rehabilitated. Almost unbelievable. Don't have time to go into detail, but you can find out more in the book. Okay, harmony, the last of these topics. Well, harmony really means things working together. And what impressed me about TM is how it promotes harmony at every level. Within the brain, areas of the brain are more coherent, they harmonize. Between the brain and the brain isn't giving the body such a hard time. You're giving your arteries a rest. You're giving your heart a rest. The brain-body system works more harmoniously. I have now seen many couples who meditate together. It brings a pool of quiet, calm, and peace into their homes. Families who meditate together, parent and child, with wonderful effects both on the individuals and on their relationship. Groups and communities. There is even a sense that if communities all begin to meditate, the more people who meditate, the more this kind of wave of harmony is spread out. Now, you might think that this is because if you're nicer to somebody, that person's going to be nicer to the next person, and a wave of goodwill is going to spread out. Or maybe there are other forces at work, which I discuss in more depth. But what is impressive is how it gets things to work together. I see it in businesses. I think there's huge potential. And in the new book, in the new version, the paperback version of Transcendence, I have brought in the area of business and what TM can do for businesses to have people work coherently. No longer are people muttering about each other behind closed doors, gossiping, backbiting, undermining each other, withholding bits of information so that other people will be caught short in a meeting. No, they're now feeling better about themselves. They're feeling better about each other. There's more harmony and there's less wasted time and negative energy in the group. So harmony is the final point that I wanted to emphasize. If I might just, before we ask questions, if I might just say, it's been really a pleasure talking with you all. Come and visit me on my website, normanrosenthal.com. Take a peek at one of these two books. Transcendence is the one that focuses on TM and its values. Winter Blues is out in its new edition. And funnily enough, it includes a chapter on meditation because I found that it even helps seasonal affective disorder, which makes sense because seasonal affective disorder is partly the lack of light, but it's partly brought on by stress. Anything that can reduce that stress is going to help. So I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. and taking time out of your busy days. And it's been a joy to share this information with you.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Rosenthal, for that. It truly was illuminating, as you promised, and it's just such a joy to hear you present all this information, not just the scientific information, which you have, I think, a unique knack in being able to present in a very lucid and engaging way, but also from your deep experience, your personal experience, and your experience with your patients. That really is a true first-hand experience that you're sharing with us. I wanted to mention those who would like to ask questions. You can type. The easiest way to do that, you see the chat window at the bottom. If you just put your cursor in there and type your question in there, that will be the easiest way, and then we'll ask Dr. Rosenthal to comment. While people are doing that, I wanted to mention, based upon the information that Dr. Rosenthal has presented and all the data and the experience with TM in the healthcare setting over all these years, we have been able to create a program especially for healthcare providers. This is under the auspices of the Maharshi Foundation USA, which is the organization that offers teaching or instruction in TM across the country through the certified TM teachers. And this is called the Health Professionals or Physicians Affiliate Courtesy Program, known as PACP for short. And what's involved in this program is that anybody who is a licensed healthcare provider who is in practice, who has an actual practice with patients or clients, and that includes MDs, DOs, and nurse practitioners, and physician assistants, and clinical psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, chiropractors, addiction counselors, and many other different categories of practitioners. You can learn the Transcendental Meditation technique at a special professional courtesy rate, and you can also refer your clients or patients for instruction for that same reduced rate. And this is a very significant reduction. It's a 1/3 reduction in the tuition fee. The fee, I might mention, which is a one-time tuition fee for instruction in Transcendental Meditation, covers all the steps that Dr. Rosenthal described, the one-on-one instruction, the 7 steps of instruction, the follow-up, intensive follow-up over the first 4 months, and then the lifetime follow-up program that's available to everyone throughout the country. That one-time fee is reduced from $1,500 for the standard adult fee to $1,020 for any health professional or any client or patient whom they refer to learn the TM program. There are additional reductions possible for people with significant financial problems. There are grants and scholarships available for people who are engaged in full-time studies, school children, and so forth. For more information about that, I encourage you to be in touch with the TM Health Professionals Association. We can explain more about it to you and how you can get involved and learn yourself or refer your colleagues and your patients or clients. And I'll ask Dr. Moorhead, who's doing the behind-the-scenes technical work here. If you see the discussion notes there on the left, perhaps, Paul, you could type the email address is healthprofessionals@tm.org. And then there's a toll-free number. He's typing it in. The toll-free number is 877-540-6222. Okay. So did they not hear that I just...
Yes, but I'm just saying that there's a separate conference going on. Have you mentioned that?
Oh, okay. So I'm being asked just to repeat that we have 2 audiences for the webinar tonight. The one is the health professional audience that has an interactive platform, and some questions are coming in through that. That's the Connect Pro Adobe Connect platform. And then the non-health professional audience that's viewing the webinar through video streaming on the tm.org website. And what you're seeing is you're seeing everything but you're not able to ask the questions or interact. So I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so let's go back to the top of these questions and see.
Would you like me to field them?
Yeah. I'm going to switch back now to Dr. Rosenthal, and let's have you address the questions that have come in here.
Okay. Teresa asks, does TM have to be taught by a teacher? Can it be taught by a CD or a book? A great question. The way in which TM is organized, it is personally instructed. And the value of that is that that has kept the teaching very constant and quality controlled. And I think it does predispose to people getting the very best possible outcome. So you might say to me, well, you know, why write a book if it's not a how-to book? I say, well, it isn't a how-to book. It's a why-to book. Because we're all so busy. And in order to justify taking 20 minutes twice a day, you really have to understand why is it worth doing? And why is it worth paying good money to do? And those of us who have had those benefits have little question about the value, nor about the dedication of the teachers and the time that they take to invest in each person to get them up and running and benefiting from TM. Thank you, Teresa. Okay. Peter Horsley writes, I work with suburban school districts that has seen a dramatic rise in adolescent suicide. Their response is to screen more adolescents for depression and to encourage them to take antidepressants. The suicide rate continues to grow. Do you see TM as a viable treatment choice for adolescent suicide? Well, you know, as a psychiatrist, when I hear the word suicide, my amygdala goes off, because this is a really, really serious problem. So I don't think that we can depend upon something novel or different. We have to do all the things that are called standard of care. We have to do all the things where there's strong, hard scientific data. This may really help. However, it stands to reason that the stresses that our young people are under are playing in to their feelings of desperation and their feelings of no longer wanting to live. So I would certainly think of TM as a resource to consider, along with the other state-of-the-art standard of care resources. I hope that answers the question. Sandra says, what about other countries? Could health and educational professionals overseas have access to the grants available? I'm going to punt that one to Dr. Rothenberg. He answers the difficult questions. I answer the easy ones.
Appreciate that. So Sandra, that this policy is being piloted in the U.S. by Maharishi Foundation USA. I believe the intention is that it will be a pilot that may be adopted by other countries. The results so far have been wonderful. We have increasing the number of health professionals participating is increasing geometrically with every month, as is the number of clients and patients that they're referring. So I think that it's very likely that that's going to happen. What I suggest is, I don't know if you're in another country or in touch with somebody who is, but you might just check with the national organization for that country that teaches Transcendental Meditation and see, raise that as a question for them. And certainly you can invite them to be in touch with us at the TM Health Professionals Association in the U.S. I wanted to mention one more thing before I turn it back to Dr. Rosenthal, is I found as a physician that these two books that he has written, I'm not saying this just because he's a dear colleague and he's so kind to share this evening with us, but these are like gold. That they are therapeutic. The books themselves are a very potent form of therapy. And what I found is if you just keep a stack of them, and you can get them on Amazon at very reasonably priced, keep a little stack of them in your office, and when you have someone you feel would really benefit, give it to them. I think it's the kindest thing you could do for your patients or clients, and they will gain access to this knowledge in a most accessible and engaging and loving way, because really the way that Dr. Rosenthal writes, I think, is unique in this field of presenting the knowledge of science, of transcending. So I just wanted to put in that plug, but it's a very heartfelt plug and very sincere about these two books.
I see over here from Paul James Moorhead, one needs to learn TM from a trained teacher. It is a simple but a delicate practice. Beautifully put, delicate. It's a delicate practice. You know, it's such a delicate technique. It's sort of so simple and so powerful once you get the hang of it. Like anything, once you learn how to ride a bicycle, how did I ever fall at the beginning? Or once you know how to swim, how did I ever flounder? But that's how it is with so many amazing techniques. Noah Mann says, I received my TM mantra 14 years ago. I've been meditating off and on since then, but I want to get back. I want to get back into it more seriously. Do you recommend I use the same mantra? I think it's a little difficult. Well, you know, the mantra you keep. It's like becomes a part of you. But what I really recommend is that you get in touch with a teacher and have your TM checked. That's the great thing about being vested in this TM program, is that you never have to pay another dime after your original investment. I know because I learned in South Africa in the 1970s. And I didn't take it very seriously. It was just one of those cool things we did as medical students. And I let it lapse. And then 5 years ago, thanks to a patient who really encouraged me to pursue it and take it seriously, I connected with a really terrific teacher, and he gently refreshed my technique, and I have subsequently had it checked by other teachers, because different teachers, like teachers in a school, different teachers have different styles and different ways about them, so you can learn a little bit differently from different people. And it's been so wonderful because these are people who've been meditating for decades, so they really know what they're talking about. So I'd encourage you not just to get back to your mantra, but to find some teacher to refresh your technique.
Dr. Moorhead, I know Dr. Scott Terry had wanted to say a few words. Are you able to open up his mic?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Nice to see you. Apparently you can't hear me.
I muted
No.
it.
Mute my speakers. Can you hear me?
Yes, Scott, we hear you. We just muted our mic so we can hear you better.
Okay, great. Is that good? Is that good?
Okay, go ahead. We hear you.
All right, great. Hi. I'm coming to you from a
new abode here, so I have lots of boxes. Hi, Dr. Rosenthal. It's nice to see you again. I'm in your book, and wow, lots of feedback. I'm okay on your end?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Okay. So, basically, I started practicing a number of years ago. I was, as you'll see in Norm's book, I had a very difficult time growing up, really severe ADHD and a profound learning disability that I wasn't expected to make it out of junior high the way I was going. I attribute a lot of this to the TM. I since have gotten 2 masters, a doctorate, and a postdoctorate. I've had a practice for 20 years in private practice. I've been a professor, and I'm actually here in Iowa I'm supposed to be helping set up a doctoral program at the University of Iowa in marriage and family therapy, which is my specialty. I also run a group practice in Chicago with 17 therapists currently under me, as well as my own practice, and I happen to be writing a number of books. My experience using this great tool of Transcendental Meditation is I've used it with people. I'd say, Norm, that your statistics of 1 to 7 vets coming back with PTSD that's often cited is way underscored, undervalued, than what we often see in the field. What I see is, out of the several dozen vets that I've seen, I've only seen one without PTSD. And he had some other issues that were pretty profound. Most everybody I see has PTSD as well as a TBI combination that's never been diagnosed. I also have used this tool of meditation with everyone from profound ADD to anxiety, depression, and simply people being able to take control back over their lives. Yes, you notice it really more with these very profound conditions. The results are incredibly dramatic. And it's part of a larger package that I utilize in terms of meditation, exercise, diet, sleep patterns, people learning how to take back control of your lives. The meditation is really profound in a number of ways. It's a useful tool in a larger context of creating a way for people to more, not just creating change in their life, but more importantly, stabilizing and developing that change into a larger systemic pattern where all of their life, not just the incident they came in for, is changed. So, for example, I'll get a simple couple case, and I will tell them to be meditating. And it's not just their own simple stress reduction, which is quite dramatically improved, but I'm also then to set up a larger systemic pattern of change that happens, because when one person, when they're both meditating, their inner relationship dramatically changes. It's also true with a veteran who will learn to meditate, and it won't just affect him, it also affects his global functioning, his family, his work, his life. So what I see is this tool is useful in a number of contexts, but it's really a profound seed to make a global change for people. And if there's any questions anybody has of me, I mean, my counseling practice is the Art and Counseling Center, and like I said, I have a lot of therapists, and I tell all my therapists to change and to meditate. But I also recommend it to every single client. It's hard not to after the results that you see over and over again.
Thank you.
So thank you. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. That was great. Can we ask you to mute your microphone again, please?
Absolutely.
Well, I just want to, It's lovely to hear from Scott. You are in my book. Wonderful story. I won't repeat it here, but it's nice to hear you're thriving. And just want to say goodbye to the audience and thank you for listening. And it's been a pleasure.
So thank you very much to everybody who attended. And thank you especially to Dr. Rosenthal for taking the time and sharing your experience and wisdom with us. I know everybody appreciates it very deeply. I wanted to mention to the health professionals on the line, we have set up a website for the association. It's in the process of being further developed. It's www.tmhealthprofessionals.org. And we'll be featuring there special events such as this one, courses for physicians and other health professionals in the clinical applications of the Transcendental Meditation technique, and various other news, late-breaking news regarding research and other news that would be of interest to anyone in the health profession. So keep in touch with us through the website, and also you see here at the lower left the discussion notes, our email address and our phone number. Don't hesitate to be in touch if you want any information about applying TM in your practice with your patients, or joining the Health Professionals Affiliate Courtesy Program, as I mentioned, so that you can take advantage of the reduced rates for yourself or your colleagues and for your patients and clients. So again, it's been a great pleasure to be with you. We certainly have enjoyed it very much, and we wish you a very pleasant evening and all success. Good night.